In the Empire, the Imperial forces are separated into three equal groups: the Imperial officers who serve the Empire, their commanding officers who enforce the regulations, and Admiral Patrick, who presides over these divisions. These are their stories. Arrival. Resting near the railing, I was enjoying the air blowing from the open viewport overlooking the beautiful forest greenery below. Like an open gallery, a section of windows lined the entire corridor. The cold air was allowed to flow freely through the interior, and I had always liked the idea of passing my time just thinking. The station Victoria lay quiet this evening, except for a few commanding officers here and there conducting class. A group of cadets marched near me, and a few other off-duty officers scaled the nearby rails to my right and left, examining the forest below. They looked restless, as if awaiting something. Their restless bodies edged closer to the rails, and their enthusiastic eyes pierced the surrounding corridors in search and in longing. What were they looking for? I could only wonder. It was close to the end of the year. The first signs of winter had been obvious for weeks, leaving an icy kiss on the station's corridor. The chilly winds had started to blow. Soon it would be time for the winds to stop whisking through the corridor. Their cheerful comfort would have to end, for it would soon be too cold to keep the windows open. I knew I would miss that, but the drapes would be drawn, and I would have to adapt. The corridor opened into a large space, and in the center there were sitting areas and tables, a recreational area to pass the time more than anything else. It was a perfect setting for reading a novel, catching up with assignments, or just laying back and having a quiet conversation. I had used the place to hide away from my daily tasks of military life, to find comfort in the peace that was difficult to acquire during the long stretch of time one did in Victoria. One could consider military life to be like hard time done in prison. Once again, other officers near the rails caught my attention. Their smiles reflected the excitement exploding from their faces. It was obvious something was happening. I raised my head up, lifting my eyes toward the entrance and watching the doors carefully. I could almost sense the atmosphere change around me. The other officers sensed it too. In that moment, the new recruits entered, with clean and fresh faces, young and strong men. Dressed in their cadets' navy blue uniforms, they marched into the station under the commanding officer's strict watch. But it wasn't these handsome men, fresh and youthful, strong with brawny bodies bound and held in their navy blue military uniforms, muscular boyish faces with baby lips and soft smooth fawn skin that captivated and mesmerized us and caught our lustful gazes. A line of beauties appeared through the entrance a step behind the cadets in perfect form, led by the scholars and perfectionists of obedience. The royal companions had arrived. I stood near the entrance, my face turned slightly sideways as I noticed them just a distance from me. My eyes, caught and bound by their perfect forms, had abandoned the beauty of the landscape down below for a more appealing sight behind me. I only had to turn to see the dozens of muscular young men being led into the corridor from where I stood. The station was especially for them, a place for learning and lecturing, as it was for the new recruits of uniform who were taught in a variety of classes concerning the basics of the Empire by Imperial officers like me. In fact, I had taught in some of these classes, but had been out for the following 2 weeks on Imperial leave. Sure, it was known the companions were trained for the pleasure of the royals, trained to keep them company, and submit to their every wish, no matter what. But this was the real test among the military personnel, the real challenge that would prove they were fit to become companions of royalty. Though only high-ranking officers were ever granted such a pleasure, sometimes the lower-ranking ones had the opportunity when a disobedient companion had to be disciplined. And those here today, watching the batch of beauties enter, knew that, and longed for the chance of such an occasion. In a momentary dreamy state, I saw him with the others. He was a lovely thing, dressed in royal blue, the color of a royal companion, which suited his smooth, bleached skin. His hair was long and red, like a fiery cape spread over his broad shoulders. He had a boyish face, with a smile that was crooked, and eyes that were large and gray in color. The robes of a companion hardly concealed, and were worn to reveal certain parts of their bodies. The companions' strong and muscular arms, along with their pale chests, seemed to invite and delight a quick purchase. The purpose was obvious: indulgence and seduction. The redhead walked with the others. 2 single lines divided the companions from one another. They were separated steps from each other to keep them from making contact with one another. Their hands were clasped against the backs of their necks. They walked with their eyes lowered. They were instructed to lower their gazes, taught to answer only when spoken to, and obeyed without a doubt the royals. They stopped near the entrance, in 2 long lines behind the marching cadets. The scholars encircled their students, carefully walking alongside them, each one on the opposite side of the lines to give discipline where it was needed. The scholars were harsh, and the sound of the whip against such beautiful skin delighted and widened their smiles. The sound of the whip echoed in the cold, chilled corridor. Faces remained still, yet eyes slightly swerved to catch a glimpse from those on the rails and a few of the cadets. The lash struck 2 champion beauties immediately on the buttocks, but with incredible control they lowered their gazes without as much as a quiver or whimper. It amazed me how well disciplined they were. The scholars had done their work, and proudly one of them gazed in my direction as if noting my approval. One might have asked, what were the scholars? Lower-ranking imperial officers, perhaps, with the pleasure every man desired, to toy with young men, to tolerate their beauty and resist from falling in love with them. In fact, they were merely dark priests of seduction, a special order set forth by the emperor himself. They were students of the craft of seduction. Admiral Patrick could have been considered one, a teacher perhaps, in the field of seduction. But I won't get into the topic of Admiral Patrick. That's a different story altogether. Admiral Patrick was too strict in his duties to ever consider such a delightful compliment, though he had learned from one of the very best. The scholars led the companions away. It was then that the redhead's eyes caught sight of my longing stare. Only in that moment did I regret ever dismissing the chance offered by the Emperor to consider a companion during my reassignment period. I was one of the very few ever given such an opportunity for my hard work. I felt myself go limp as his eyes found me by the rails. The sparkles in his gaze caught me and sent a shock of pleasure to every inch of my body before it dropped and abandoned me. Again I bit my lip. Why did I refuse? I muttered foolishly to myself, clinging to the rails as the pleasure passed through me. But now it was too late, and the hopes of ever seeing such a chance were beyond my grasp. The best I could hope for was a promotion or, through good behavior, to win myself another opportunity of such. But who was I kidding? When such an opening was given, one was a fool not to take it, and that's what I was. Beyond the station antechamber, officers walking by stopped to examine the newly arrived batch of beauties with awe. Immediate disappointment spread over their faces, as a glare from the scholars and superior commanding officers seemed to remind them they would be denied this pleasure as I had been, unless special discipline was required from lower-ranking officers. The companions marched and disappeared from view. But even after their forms had become only a blur from where I stood, I couldn't stop thinking about him. The wonder in his eyes, the gentleness in his step. For a companion who was a willing servant, there was a sense of rebelliousness in his eyes, and a need to be tamed by the right person. I had seen all this within those moments. The conceited little smile spread over his face that was inviting as well as controlling. It had a great power over me, a force that was, without a doubt, overwhelming. His eyes were alive, and as divine as that smile upon his beautiful face. The smile that said, "Conquer me. Will you take the challenge?" I certainly would, I thought with humorous delight. I couldn't think, nor could I move. The feeling had frozen me in place. Only when I almost lost my balance did I grip the railings and spot Commander Peterson approaching. "Gabriel!" His soft voice awakened me, and I gazed at him now as he stepped by my side next to the railings. And I moved to salute, but stopped myself. Lieutenant, when did you get in? He questioned with great excitement, as his eyes flashed with delight at me. He ignored my attempts to salute, giving me no time to answer, and embraced me tightly. Then, pushing me gently away, he laid a single kiss on my cheek. Though I felt his intentions were to kiss my lips, he resisted this. So like him to be such a professional officer, even with me. Sometimes he reminded me of Admiral Patrick, and those thoughts alone hounded my mind and made me uncomfortable when I was around the Admiral, because I couldn't stop thinking about Peterson in the same manner, bent in front of me, in a position that would make anyone blush. At times, the Admiral would glare at me with frustration and dismiss my actions as childish and unprofessional. I hated that. I wanted respect from him and the others, and I knew the only means to get it was by word of mouth, and the Admiral was a good start for any good officer. Though others thought that was impossible, I considered every option. What did it take to get the approval of such a man as the Admiral? Did one have to be as beautiful and yet possess the intelligence and strict demeanor he did? Surely, then one had to be like the Prince. "Why didn't you send word you were coming back sooner?" Commander Peterson asked, looking slightly hurt and yet delighted to see me. "I didn't expect to," I smirked, as he now rested his own hands on the railings next to me. I had returned early from my time off, bored and frustrated with civilian life, dragging myself back to the one place that could both entertain me and occupy me. After frequenting the civilian bars on nearby planets and roaming the galaxy in search of adventure, I gave up and decided to come back home to the one place that could somehow always tame and amuse me. Commander Peterson's green eyes stared at me hard. I could sense how much he had missed me. The curve of my lips invited his longings, invited his rising desires, the ones obvious on his youthful face. Though older by a few years, Peterson, or Eric, which was his first name, didn't show his true age. He was a strict officer whose control over others had won him my admiration. I was only 20 years old when I first came to the Empire. It was during the first months of training that I grew to know him and later fell in love with him. Back then it was he who led me like a lost puppy. But now, over time, things seemed different. And now I saw the same weakness in his eyes that had been in mine at the beginning of our relationship. Again, I curved my lips slightly, revealing the dimples on my cheeks, a feature that was greatly envied and very much admired. I just got back. I couldn't take it anymore. There's nothing out there, I've checked. Ha ha, Eric grinned, foolishly mocking. Besides, there's more drama here in the Empire than out there or anywhere in the galaxy. Is that a fact? He chuckled. His lips curved slightly, and when he laughed, he was a handsome devil. His full lips remained plump, and his eyes sparkled and became tearful, like he hadn't had a good laugh in a long time. In fact, he had once said that I was the only one that could ever make him laugh, and now I could understand why. Before, his natural actions or his mannerisms never concerned me as they seem to now. That's why I left the Zek a long time ago, he added, referring to the fact that most of the drama in the Empire was on board the Zek, and partially because of Admiral Patrick. In that sense, he was not far from the truth, but I never took part when he indirectly meant to insult the Admiral, whom I held great respect for. When I didn't laugh, he fell silent, and as I glanced toward the window, he edged closer. I have time to spare before I have to go back on duty. I'd like to spend it with you, if I can. I've missed you dearly, Gabriel. I honestly didn't expect to see you return so soon. He smiled warmly, drawing his hand closer until it was resting upon mine. He then gripped my hand. He would have kissed it if we had been alone, but again, his professional demeanor kept him in place. On Station Victoria, he was as well respected as he was hard-working. Known in the Empire as a devoted officer, esteemed by his peers and colleagues. Yet when they saw us together, there was always envy in the eyes of others. I was regarded as the handsome one. I was sure my good looks were the cause of the cruel, unspeakable whispers and rumors about me. When I came forward with these claims to Commander Peterson, he insisted people were jealous of our relationship and to ignore them. But I couldn't. I simply couldn't. These things enraged me, so that over a period of time, I couldn't concentrate on my work and became a nervous wreck. Commander Peterson, worried and concerned about my health, took it upon himself to silence the rumors. Once again, he became the cruel and harsh gentleman officer that had driven the arrow into my heart. He had salvaged the remainder of my dignity for what it was worth and showered me with apologies as if this had somehow been his fault. I assumed in a sense he was partially to blame for not stopping the rumors before they had worsened. "How can I? I just got back," I uttered. But was it that? I could easily walk back with him to his private chambers and do as I pleased. I had no one to report to but him, and he could so easily make up an excuse for my absence if I needed it. In the past, it was I who begged him for a moment of his love. It was I who wanted his company, and I who didn't care about regulations and those irritating rules and concerns. Now things had changed, and it was he who would put aside his rulebook and concerns to be with me. His gaze fell upon me with eagerness, and it seemed the desires boiling inside him would no longer remain hidden. Then I felt that if I didn't give in to his wishes, he would drop into my arms sobbing like a helpless child. "You know you don't need to concern yourself with that." Of course I knew that, but what delighted me more, the very fact, or seeing how easily he would break his own rules to simply be with me? "Yes, I know," I whispered, turning away from him, longing for an excuse to wander from him and see what trouble I could find on my own now that I had returned. I was bored. Bored with how easily I could manipulate him, bored with the idea that I could get away with just about anything. "Don't you miss being with me?" he immediately and boldly asked, so that it surprised me as well as impressed me. I wondered whether he was slowly growing tired of my distance or simply realizing what a fool he had been to allow me such freedom over him. "Of course I do," I answered slowly. Hesitating was a habit of mine when answering him. "Then what's wrong? Are you upset with me?" he asked again, sounding as tame as a pussycat. The hopes faded from me as I continued to gaze out the huge viewports of Station Victoria at the arriving vessels and the shouts of officers all around us, interrupting the flow of my own thoughts. "No, of course not. It's nothing really. I guess all I really need is some excitement, that's all. I left here hoping to find something out there, but I was disappointed when I didn't. Now I feel like I'm back to where I started." I tried to look up at him, and again my innocent eyes had overpowered him, and he'd now wrapped his arms around me. "Are you sure that's all that's bothering you, and that it has nothing to do with us? Let's face it, we didn't see eye to eye before you left. I didn't want you to leave angry with me, but I also didn't want to stop you from doing whatever you wanted to do. I want to protect you, but I know I can't always." He pressed his lips inward and lowered his eyes. Only then could I see his true age and wisdom as the words poured from his lips and from the features of his firm expression. He seemed fatherly and nurturing. No, it's not you, it's me. Sometimes I don't know why I do the things I do, nor why you put up with me." Again, I felt like a spoiled lover, nuzzling into his older lover, clinging to him for protection and understanding, as only he could give to one as wickedly handsome as me, one who could so easily convince, with loving embraces and innocent eyes, an older man whose only fear was to be left alone. "I do," Eric smiled. "It's because you are dear to me, and I love you." He squeezed me close and held me tightly. "So, it's excitement you seek?" he smirked. "Then why are we waiting around here? Let's go somewhere we can be alone together." He gazed down at me and planted a kiss upon my forehead, pressing me closer. I could feel the hard organ beneath his uniform slacks rest against my own leg. The desire coursed through him as he held me, and I even felt him tremble beneath my touch. I gazed back at his loving green eyes. Not at all what I had in mind, I thought, but perhaps the time would ease my own desires and the thoughts of the young redhead companion that still lingered in my loins. But the more I thought of him, the more I wanted him, and the more Admiral Patrick continued to haunt my awakening dreams. As soon as we entered his chambers, he launched on me, burying his hungry lips on my own. He didn't even wait until we were completely inside, or for that matter, undressed. Usually it was he who prolonged our moments, he who left me desiring him as he slowly made his way to me, throwing me upon the bed or pinning me against the wall as he unfastened his trousers and undressed, then pulled my pants down to have my pale, bare buttocks exposed to his cock as he entered me and satisfied himself first. But this time it was a completely different story, and it was he who would satisfy me, simply because he wanted me by his side. I wasted no time, already feeling myself hard. Unzipping my pants, I pulled out the dick as I ripped the trousers from his body. He voluntarily turned for me as I drove the monster into him and began riding him with devilish pleasure. At the same time, I grabbed his already hardened prick and began to pump it within my grasp, moving in the same satisfying rhythm. He spread himself across the wall, his arms extended, his buttocks exposed outward, firm as I held him to me. "Yes," he cried out, through gasps and moans. It should have excited me, but instead I longed for harsh words and punishment from him. Instead of weak, boyish whimpers, I longed for spankings, longed for his pinches and those slaps that delighted me during our outrageous lovemaking. The moments he demanded to see me, only to punish me in his quarters, with others a door away from what took place, others who could have so easily walked in on us. I loved those moments. To be caught with him in my arms, to have others see just how much he loved me, and how much he loved to fuck me. To be punished when I was summoned to his quarters, knowing, expecting, and desiring the whip, the spankings, and the bonds. To be on my knees before him, pulled by my hair, and having his delicious pecker shoved into my open mouth so that I might pleasure my demanding master. But now it was all gone, and he had been tamed, and now it was he who would fall to his knees before me, he who would open his mouth to my shaft, and he who now cried beneath me when I fucked him. I collapsed upon him in ecstasy as he buckled beneath me, his face pressed against the wall and his eyes closed. He took a deep breath and reached back to put his hand over my buttocks. "Tie me up, Gabriel. Bind my hands together and ride me once more. I want you beside me again. Don't leave. Let's stay here this evening. We don't have to go back on duty." I pushed gently from him as he turned immediately to gaze back at me, wrapping his arms around my waist. His hungry, wet organ had hardened again, and I could feel it touching my bare buttocks. No. At first, that's all that came from my mouth, as I moved to gather my clothes from the floor, removing his arms from around me. "What?" He moved towards me and took hold of my arm. I slowly turned to meet his confused expression as his tall, muscular form stood naked before me. "I can't. Not now," I said as I turned away, bowing my head, silently hoping he would not ask me again, but I couldn't expect him not to. "Why?" I tried not to look at him, but it was hard. He turned me to him once more, and as my expression met his, I saw the pain I was causing him by not being truthful. "I have to go to Station Delta. I leave after the auction tomorrow evening," I said, pulling up my trousers and fastening my belt. The auction in reference was the purchase of the companions. Everyone would be there to watch the great sale and to see the beauties displayed before the crowd of hungry imperial eyes. It was the biggest thing held on Station Victoria, and those few commanding officers with the opportunity of buying a companion came to do so. There were rumors that the prince would come, but those were never true. What was believable were the rumors of Admiral Patrick making an appearance, or a maintenance check as he liked to refer to it, rather than coming for the celebration. Let's face it, he was more into this than he wanted people to believe, and that's what I liked about him. It only made me wonder what secrets lay untold in his personal world. "What business do you have there?" Again, I tried to avoid his eyes, but it was hard to keep my feelings from showing to someone who already knew certain gestures gave me away when I tried to lie. I didn't answer right away, but then I wasn't even sure myself what exactly had me heading in the direction of Station Delta. "What are you seeking, Gabriel?" he finally asked. I didn't answer right away. perhaps frustrated that he simply had to know every bit of my business. I want to be someone. I fell silent and rushed to put on my uniform jacket to try to avoid further questions. What do you want? Do you even know what you want? I want to be more than your little love toy. I want to be someone important. I held in the tears, pushed them back as hard as I could, until I felt a lump in my throat, aching to escape. You are important, Gabriel. You're important to me. I want to be more than that. I want others to know it. I want recognition. I'm tired of living in your shadow. Recognition from who? You're important to me. Isn't that enough? My shadow? No, you don't understand. I rushed to the exit, and he followed me to the access door and took hold of my arm again. I pulled away, slapping my officer's cap over the strands of my blonde mane. Gabriel, stay and talk to me. Don't push me away. Please. I couldn't even look him in the eyes as I stood before him by the access door. He reached over to caress my cheek. I tried to avoid his touches as a sigh escaped my lips, and without a word, I turned from him and left him standing alone in his chambers.